Civil rights activist James Weldon Johnson wrote Lift Their Voice and Sing as a poem, which was set to music by his brother John Roseman Johnson in 1899. The song is now known as the Black National Anthem in America. It is a protest, a hymn, and a prayer of profound significance for our people. We lift every voice and sing to express ourselves. We lift every voice to show that we have strength in numbers and we will not be silent. We lift every voice and sing to be lifted, liberated, and free.
Freedom, the power to determine action without restraint. Freedom, the absence of or release from ties, obligations, or restrictions. Freedom, the ease or facility of movement or action. Freedom, frankness or boldness in manner or speech. Freedom, a political right. Until we are all free, none of us is free. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of that are rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chasing rod. Those in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright story stands. God of our weary ears, God of our silent tears.
We are Unitarian Universalists. We are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. We are diverse in faith, ethnicity, history, and spirituality, but aligned in our desire to make a difference for the good. We have a track record of standing on the side of love, justice, and peace. We have radical roots and a history as self-motivated spiritual people. We think for ourselves and recognize that life experiences influence our beliefs more than anything. Knowing that we need not think alike to love alike, we are people of many beliefs and backgrounds. People with a religious background, people with none. People who believe in a God, people who don't, and people who choose to let the mystery be. We are Unitarian Universalist and Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, humanist, Jewish, Muslim, pagan, atheist and agnostic, Taoist, believers in God, and more. We are on the forefront of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer inclusion for more than 40 years. We are people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. We are not afraid to say Black Lives Matter, and through Black Lives UU, we fight to end racial injustice and police brutality. We are a people of faith and hope. Together we covenant to strive to become our better selves, to honor both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to respond to systems of violence and oppression with the power of a love beyond belief. We seek to welcome you, your whole self, with all your truths and your doubts, your worries and your hopes. Join us on this extraordinary adventure of faith. We welcome you.
Good morning. Welcome to the Lake Chapala Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. My name is Roy Haynes, and I will be your service leader today, as well as the coordinator of today's service. Our minister, Reverend Matt Aspaw, is off today. In fact, he is on his way to North Carolina. Today's service is part one of a two-part service honoring Black History Month. The second part will be presented on February 21st. Our presenters today are Deb Gang, Donna Burroughs, Lynn Cleek, Susie Lindeman, and Colleen Beery. Our service today will focus on a brief history of Afro-American history as it relates to Unitarian Universalism and its work around Black Lives Matter movement. And with all of that said, live from Fellowship Hall is our LCUUF Sunday service. All our announcements were on a slideshow prior to the service, but if you didn't see them, don't worry about it. Reverend Matt will post them in a link to tomorrow's sharing.
Our chalice lighting words today are by Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. Please light your chalice.
We kindle this light in celebration for the life that we share.
Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we are part of a family. We belong to a community that cares for each other. By sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have any joys or sorrows to share today, please type them in chat and we will try to read them aloud. First, let us voice our sorrows and concerns. Whatever the world may be holding, whatever needing and caring thoughts, please type your sorrows into the chat box now.
We have a sorrow from Joni, who says, sorrow for our dear friend John Simmons, died here this week. That's all.
Now let us recall the joys, whatever you may be celebrating, whatever invokes a feeling of joy and peace, you may type those into the chat box now.
We have a joy from Trudy and Lou Crippen, who say they have joy for their new great nephew, Roman. Wow, great grandparents. That's all.
Now we light our care candle that represents the sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. So many of us have had losses of partners, children, grandkids, losses that we carry every day. So many of us have burdens, anger, fear, and frustrations of all the things that weigh heavy on our hearts. We light this candle for all of those unspoken sorrows.
Colleen, there was one more sorrow that came in directly to me, and it's from Esther. And she has a sorrow for all of the families in the world that have lost people to the pandemic.
Thank you, Trudy.
This is a time in our service when we ask you to remember that we share our gifts through pledging and donations. We're not meeting in person now, but our connections to each other and our contributions to the community continue. Instructions for payments to the fellowship are on a slide during the announcement show each week. And when you are considering your gifts to the fellowship, remember each month that LCUUF donates 5,000 pesos or more to an organization providing food in our lakeside community. For the month of February, the recipient is Food Bank Lakeside. Food Bank Lakeside is currently collecting and distributing food to needy families while respecting social distancing, with an emphasis on those families who have lost their income due to the economic downturn caused by COVID-19. When you pay your pledge, please add something for Share the Basket, as if you were in place pesos in the physical basket. You can donate in the same way that you pay your pledge. Please donate Share the Basket separately to indicate which part of your pledge is for Share the Baskets. Our offerings are gratefully received. Today's speakers will offer a brief, abbreviated glance into UU Black history with its struggles and challenges like most religious organizations. We will start off with a video of the original organization of the Black Lives Matter movement and travel into brief UU history with its race in the past and include a look at what is going on today with the Black Lives UU.
Do we have the video? Hello, this is Dan Zimmerman at Illustrate to Educate. I've made this special video to help educate myself and others on the Black Lives Matter movement. I also wanted to support and love those who have been affected by racism and to honor those who have died due to racial injustice. Have you ever wondered about the history behind the Black Lives Matter movement? The Black Lives Matter movement is an international activist movement originating in the African American community. There are many goals that this movement is trying to accomplish. First, the BLM campaigns against violence and systematic racism towards Black people. They regularly hold protests speaking out against police killings of Black people, as well as broader issues including racial profiling, police brutality, and lastly, racial inequality in the United States criminal justice system. Now that we know what problems the BLM is trying to solve, let's take a look at how it got started. In 2013, the movement began with the use of the hashtag Black Lives Matter on social media after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting death of African American teen Trayvon Martin in February 2012. The movement was co-founded by 3 Black community organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. They began to question how they were going to respond to what they saw as the devaluation of Black lives after Zimmerman's acquittal. Garza wrote a Facebook post titled "A Love Note to Black People," in which she said, "Our lives matter, Black lives matter." Later, Cullors replied, "Black Lives Matter." Tometi then added her support, and Black Lives Matter was born as an online campaign. Please note that as I go through a timeline of events, I am only able to cover a small portion of events and people who were involved in the BLM movement. In 2014, Black Lives Matter demonstrated against the deaths of numerous African Americans by police actions, including those of Dontre Hamilton, Eric Garner, John Crawford III, Michael Brown, Ezell Ford, Laquan McDonald, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Antonio Martin, and Jeremy Reed, among others. In July, Eric Garner died in New York City after a New York City Police Department officer put him in a chokehold while arresting him. Garner's death has been cited as one of the several police killings of African Americans that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. In August, during Labor Day weekend, Black Lives Matter organized a Freedom Ride that brought more than 500 African Americans from across the United States into Ferguson, Missouri, to support the work being done on the ground by local organizations. And in December, 2,000 to 3,000 people gathered at the Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota, to protest the killings of unarmed Black men by police. In 2015, Black Lives Matter demonstrated against the death of additional African Americans by police actions. These include Charlie Cuning, Tony Robinson, Anthony Hill, Megan Hockaday, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Jonathan Sanders, and Sandra Bland, among others. In April, supporters of the BLM movement protested around the United States and in Baltimore over the death of Freddie Gray. Also, there were protests for Walter Scott's death in North Charleston, calling for citizen oversight of police. In September, over 500 BLM protesters in Austin, Texas rallied against police brutality, and several briefly carried protest banners onto Interstate 35. Meanwhile, in Sacramento, California, about 800 BLM protesters rallied to support a California Senate bill that would increase police oversight. In 2016, the BLM movement demonstrated against the deaths of the following African Americans by police actions: Bruce Kelly Jr., Alton Sterling, Philandro Castile, Joseph Mann, Abdirham Abdi, Paul O'Neill, Corin Gaines, Sylville Smith, and Deborah Danner, among others. On July 5th, Alton Sterling, a 37-year-old Black man, was shot several times while pinned to the ground by 2 white Baton Rouge Police Department officers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That night, more than 100 demonstrators in Baton Rouge set off fireworks and blocked an intersection to protest Sterling's death. In that same month, NBA stars LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, and Dwayne Wade opened the 2016 ESPY Awards with a Black Lives Matter message. Beginning in August, several professional athletes have participated in the 2016 U.S. National Anthem protest. The protest began in the National Football League after Colin Kaepernick of the San Francisco 49ers sat during the anthem, as opposed to the tradition of standing before his team's 3rd preseason game of 2016. During a post-game interview, he explained his position, stating, I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses Black people and people of color. In 2017, during Black History Month, a month-long Black Lives Matter art exhibition was organized by 3 Richmond, Virginia artists at the First Unitarian Universalist Church. The show featured more than 30 diverse, multicultural artists on a theme of exploring racial equality and justice. On February 10th, the BLM movement protested the shooting of Jacques Clemens, which occurred in Nashville, Tennessee. On May 12, 2017, the day after the district attorney of Davidson County decided not to prosecute the police officer responsible for Jacques' death, the BLM held a demonstration near Vanderbilt University campus, all the way to the residence of the Nashville mayor. Lastly, let's take a look at what's happened most recently. At the end of May 2020, spurred on by a rash of racially charged events, major protests were held around the United States due primarily to the police killing of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter movement helped organize a rally in the United States and worldwide on May 30th. On the blacklivesmatter.com website, it states, "Enough is enough. Our pain, our cries, and our need to be seen and heard resonate throughout this entire country. We demand acknowledgement and accountability for the devaluation and dehumanization of Black life at the hands of the police. We call for radical, sustainable solutions that affirm the prosperity of Black lives."
Every February, Americans say the names and retell the stories of African Americans whose achievements and contributions have changed us for the better. When we investigate our shared past, we learn more about who we are today. Like the United States as a whole, Unitarian Universalism as a religion has been pushed forward in large and small ways by many prophetic Black voices. Today's presentation will give us a brief vision of African Americans' relationship with Unitarian Universalism. Our discussion on February 21st will focus on a few of these famous visionary voices. In most religious organizations, African American contributions were invisible for many years. Unitarian Universalism was no different. African Americans have been founding members of Unitarian and Universalist congregations dating back as early as 1785. However, many names are not known. So why did African American culture, experiences, and sensibilities remain invisible? There was a cultural dissonance between people who had political rights, prized intellectual freedom in their struggle with orthodoxy, and those for whom the struggles for basic political and spiritual freedoms were paramount. Face it, the white conscience of yesteryear did not want to know these contributions. Not knowing African American contributions to UU history meant white liberals didn't have to feel guilty for their actions when dealing with the social affairs of African Americans. Ignorance is bliss. However, African Americans continued seeking a home in Unitarian Universalism despite the invisibility of Black lives in UU history. Much of this growth occurred between 1910 and 1940 due to the Great Migration of Blacks to northern cities. Geographic location was the key. In those days, Unitarians were urban, well-educated, accustomed to having money, and used to having power. Those attributes were also very appealing to African Americans. Class identification was actually an advantage for the Unitarians and a disadvantage to the Universalists. Most Unitarians were progressive intellectual people. African American UU lay people born prior to the 1930s, doctors, dentists, scholars, teachers, scientists, lawyers, and social workers, mostly identified as Unitarians, not Universalists. In contrast, Universalists tended to be rural, less well-educated, fearful of power, and not used to having it. Universalists were dominant in places where there were few African Americans, such as the East Coast and the Midwest. Both Unitarianism and Universalism spoke to the Black experience in different ways. Universalists were influenced by the social norms of the communities in which they were located, being careful not to stray too far from what was considered socially acceptable. In contrast, Unitarian congregations had more success with outreach to Blacks and integration of Blacks into their congregations because many of the ministers were also social activists, willing to take a stand against many injustices, including slavery and poverty. The old Universalist adage, the supreme worth of every person, or as we now say in one of our 7 principles, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, invites people to say, yes, Black lives matter, but all lives matter. While this is a true statement, when offered in response to Black Lives Matter, it means something else entirely. Saying all lives matter tells African Americans we do not know the difference between people of privilege and people of oppression. Within many religious organizations, including Unitarian Universalism, phrases such as God is love and we are all God's children have been used. But with regard to African Americans, many of these organizations did not truly act in accordance with that belief, nor did they articulate how it might speak to Black suffering. Ralph Ellison writes in Invisible Man, I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. That has been the Black experience within Unitarian Universalism. In a 1956 survey, it reported that 80 Unitarian congregations had African American members. And in 49 of those congregations, African Americans were active as officers. That means over 70 years ago, nearly 50% of those congregations had African American members holding positions of leadership. This is not common knowledge, whether 1969 or 2021. The Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison writes in his article, The Black Hole in the White UU Psyche, during General Assembly meetings in the late 1960s, the presence of hundreds of people of color left many white UUs perplexed. Some even asked, where did they all come from? Answer, they've been here all along. In that article, Morrison asked us to consider these questions. What are the consequences of not knowing Black UU history? Does this lack of knowledge of Black UU history and failure to mention Black leaders confirm the belief that Unitarian Universalism does not appeal to African Americans? Why don't we know this history? Does this support the narrative that Black UU lives don't matter? As a consequence, we have embraced a false narrative about who we are as Unitarian Universalists. In the book, 2 Centuries of Distinguished UU Women, published in 1973 by the UU Women's Federation, not one African American woman is included among the 102 biographies. Not Fannie Barrier Williams, not Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, nor Florida Yates Ruffin Ridley. Their biographies did not appear in a UU publication until 1999's Standing Before Us. African Americans were invisible, reflecting the belief and contributing to the belief that there was no story to tell. The civil rights movement of the 1960s saw much change in Unitarian Universalism and its relationship with African Americans. The UUA began passing resolutions supporting desegregation, civil rights, removal of racially discriminatory language from congregational bylaws, and created a commission on religion and race. UUs became active in protest, with over 1,700 UUs participating in the March on Washington. 500 UU lay people and over 200 UU ministers marched on the final day in Selma, Alabama. Over half of all UU ministers were engaged in the civil rights struggle at some level. In 1968, the first National Conference of Black Unitarian Universalists met and formed the Black Affairs Council. They claimed that UUA religious education curricula did not include Blacks, the Black contributions to American society. They demanded more Black representation in the leadership at the national level and more financial support from the UUA. The Black and White Alternative was formed in response to this objection. African Americans were invisible in leadership roles at the UUA until after the walkout at the 1969 General Assembly over funding requests and a power struggle between the Black Affairs Council and the Black and White Alternative. The UUA had to address this problem. But a year later, the UUA found itself near financial ruin, and the Black Affairs Council disaffiliated from the UUA over major budget cuts and lack of funding. Many African Americans left Unitarian Universalism for good and never returned. Throughout the 1970s, Black ministers continued to seek fellowship, with few able to be settled into congregations. Much like early UU history, African American influence was not seen or included in UU worship and liturgy. There was nothing written by or about African Americans in UU hymnals. Not until 1993 did African American culture make its first significant appearance in the UU hymn book. With the publication of Singing the Living Tradition, Negro spirituals such as Lift Every Voice and Sing and We Shall Overcome were included for the first time in the hymnal. An effort was made by the UUA Religious Education Department to address the issue of racism through religious education. No systematic approach to the inclusion of African American UU history took place until the UU Identity Curriculum team was established in the mid-1980s. A 1989 study of UU worship preference tells us that African Americans don't fit the same pattern as other UUs. The item that was most important in worship for 75% of all non-African American UUs was intellectual stimulation. However, what was most important for 69% of African American UUs who responded to the same survey were the celebration of common values, followed by hope, vision, and music, all before intellectual stimulation. By 1993, the UUA had produced a half-dozen curricula in which Black history was entwined with the story of other UUs. Since then, African American leadership at the national level has progressed. Today, African Americans have been widely represented in both elected and appointed positions, including William G. Sinkford's 8-year term as president of the UUA. In 2016, there were 6 people of color in managerial positions, including UUA President Peter Morales. Numerous people of color hold ministerial positions in large and small congregations throughout the world. What our tortured, tragic, disappointing history teaches us is that change is incremental. It takes time. In the process, many people of color have been wounded, are wounded, and will continue to be wounded. But change is inevitable and seems to be accelerating. The time in Unitarian Universalism when Black lives didn't matter is past. That is seen daily by the works of the Black Lives UU organization. Change comes, but not necessarily on a time schedule. We have fallen short and will again. And when we do, we need to pause and ask ourselves, what does love demand of me? Then stand up and try again. Impatience is not what sustains us. Rather, we are sustained by dreams, hope, work, and companionship. The chance to pour out one's life for faith, principles, and people whom we value.
Young people, poor, black, queer, women have caused the nation to pay attention to the humanity of black people. And as my dear brother Chris Crass reminds us all, that white folks, your souls are at stake in this work. And so our task before us now is for you not to be allies, but to be freedom fighters. That you be willing to take the kind of risks that are necessary in order for your own salvation, in order for you to become more humane, because there is something cosmically at stake for you as well. Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize.
So what I care about is whether you are here or you go home, join an organizing community. Join people in the long fight of struggle, because it's not just about getting shot. It's not just about can I eat. It's about changing the very foundation upon which we live. It's about completely fundamental change of our system. Completely. About everything. Everything. Because otherwise, it'll be about one thing and not about everything. We got to be about everything. And love is about every piece of the puzzle. Organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. We're not doing it for power, glory, or fame. We're not doing it for power, glory, or fame. We're not doing it so others can know our name. We're not doing it so others can know our name. We're doing it because we want to make a change. We're doing it because we want to make a change. So stand up, get up, and do the right thing. So stand up, get up, and do the right thing. Because we got to organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize.
Today's reading, A Pastoral Letter to Black UU, is by Reverend Lauren Smith, who is Director of Stewardship and Development at the UUA. She oversees the UU's fundraising efforts, including annual program contributions from member congregations. Breathe, breath, life. June 4th, 2020, Reverend Smith writes, and recall that this is just a few days after George Floyd's murder. June 4th, 2020, Reverend Smith writes, I write you today as a Black Unitarian Universalist, a Black woman, a Black mother, and a Black minister. How is it with your spirit today? Today, my spirit is struck by grief. I trust in the possibility of change, and I know that there is a place for me in bringing about that change. The grief is deep, but underneath grief and anger, there is a fierce love that is a saving grace. I don't know how it is for you, but I love being Black. I love my skin, all the varieties of it, and Black hair and Black voices. It's a pleasure to be a part of communities so beautiful and diverse, communities that have encountered a world of sorrow and have countered with creativity and intellect and embodied resilience. It's an honor to be a part of a lineage that includes Ella Baker and James Baldwin, Michelle Obama and my granny Inez, Audre Lorde and Jimmy Cliff. The well of my grief and anger is deep, but the well of my love and gratitude is deeper still. Blackness is a healing balm. What does it mean to survive when so many of us have died recently, unable to breathe? George Floyd and Eric Gardner before him, killed by a broken system of policing, tens of thousands of Black people killed by COVID-19. Then there's the economic devastation due to the pandemic, which is ravaging our communities, and the pervasive violence visited on Black trans folks. Tony McDade, I say your name. The roots of these traumas extend down through the centuries. I have to remind myself often to breathe, a practice I learned years ago from healers who understood deep truths about recovery from trauma. Not long ago, one of my colleagues at the UUA posted a meditation helpful for people experiencing anxiety. I share it as a gift now, adaptable to whatever senses are available to you. It begins with the breath. Leave the anxiety, find a quiet place and take a few deep breaths. Then notice 5 things you can hear, 4 things you can see, 3 things you can feel, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Then take a few more deep breaths. As you navigate these days, you will discover how to take care of yourself and those you love, how to participate in movements of liberation. May you carry with you the gift of your breath, the beauty of your being, the miracle of your living body, and the vibrant legacy of our elders, ancestors, and communities. Take care, dear folks. Reverend Lauren.
Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, BLUU, grew out of the broader movement for Black lives. In many ways, the origins of BLUU dates back to the 1970s when many Black UUs left our faith in the wake of unfulfilled promises made by the UU Association during what became known as the time of the Black empowerment controversy. The movement for Black Lives convening held in Cleveland, Ohio, July 24th, 25th, and 26th, 2015, brought together over 1,500 Black people from across the country to build, heal, learn, and organize. It was truly an historic gathering when the UU Caucus took time out that weekend to discuss the various issues we face in our faith and Black people, as Black people. While many challenges and personal experiences were shared, one thing stood out for all: Our UU faith is what calls us to say, Black Lives Matter. BLUU is an independent organization fiscally sponsored by the UUA, led by an executive director, a community minister, and a volunteer organizing collective, which provides ministry for and by Black Unitarian Universalists, while also working to expand the role and visibility of Black UUs within our faith. One of BLUU's first steps was to proclaim 7 principles of Black lives, drawing a direct link between the 7 UU principles and Black liberation. There is definitely a link between the 7 UU principles and the movement for Black Lives. Members from this gathering at the Movement for Black Lives convening, along with Black UUs, created this document to present our faith, the 7 principles of Black lives. Our hope is that this direct connection between our faith and the fight for Black liberation will make it clear the urgent need for all those who call themselves Unitarian Universalists to declare without caveat or clarification that Black lives matter. During the week of September 14th, 2015, the UUA and Black Lives UU released 1 principle of Black lives per day, outlining the important principles that guide us in the work towards Black liberation, how these principles connect with the 7 UU principles, and how we were able to live out these principles at the Movement for Black Lives convening. Principle 1, all Black lives matter. Queer Black lives, trans Black lives, formerly incarcerated Black lives, differently abled Black lives, Black women's lives, immigrant Black lives, Black elderly and children's lives. All Black lives matter and are creators of this space. We throw no one under the bus. We rise together. The Movement for Black Lives calls on the Unitarian Universalist faith, a faith willing to make the bold proclamation that each person inherently matters, to live up to that claim by working toward a future in which Black lives are truly valued in our society. We call on Unitarian Universalism to actively resist notions that Black lives only matter in contrast to white middle-class norms, and to challenge assumptions of worth centered around clothing, diction, education, or other status. Our value is not conditional. Principle 2, love and self-love is practiced in every element of all we do. Love and self-love must be drivers of all our work and indicators of our success. Without this principle and without healing, we will harm each other and undermine our movement. The Movement for Black Lives seeks to build a society where Black people thrive instead of survive. We seek justice for those who have lost to police violence. We seek equity in housing, education, and health care. We seek compassion from our fellow UUs for the struggle we are called to be a part of. Principle number 3, spiritual growth is directly tied to our ability to embrace our whole selves. A principled struggle must exist in a positive environment. We must be honest with one another by embracing direct, loving communication and acknowledgement of all that we are and all that we hope to be. The spiritual growth of UUs of color is directly tied to our ability to stand in the truth that Black lives matter, that our lives matter, both in the wider world, and just as importantly, in our UU congregations and the UUs to support our work towards wholeness as Black people. We must be honest with one another by embracing direct, loving communication. Principle 4, experimentation and innovation must be built into our work. Embrace the best tools, practices, tactics, and leave behind those that no longer serve us. Evaluation and assessment must be built into our work. Critical reflection must be a part of all of our work. We learn from our mistakes and our victories. The movement for Black Lives works directly to expose the truth about Black life in this country and the world, to uncover the layer of white supremacy that exists in our society, to bring to light the anti-Blackness that is present in our everyday lives. We call on all UUs to root out the anti-Blackness that exists within our congregations and our faith. Principle 5, most directly affected people are experts at their own lives. Those most directly affected by racial injustice and oppression should be in leadership, at the center of our movement, and telling their stories directly. We stand in the movement for Black lives at a time which voting rights are being threatened at every turn. Black people are being denied the most basic of rights, the right to vote and to have adequate representation in our country. We work towards a society in which Black life is valued, in which Black life is not discarded, in which Black lives matter, and in which the work of Black people is seen as equal to their white counterparts. Black voices in our congregations, in our faith, and in the world must be valued. Principle 6, thriving instead of surviving. Our vision is based on the world we want and not the world we currently are in. We seek to transform, not simply to react. We want our people to thrive, not just exist, and to think beyond the possible. Any work towards peace, liberty, and justice must address racial injustice. Black UUs are calling on our faith to join us as we work toward justice for all Black people and, by extension, for all people. Principle 7, 360-degree vision. We honor the past struggles and wisdoms of our elders. The work we do today builds a foundation of movements of tomorrow. We consider our mark on the future generations, acknowledging the ways in which a supremacist society diminishes us all is a critical part of the work of the movement for Black lives. When the most marginalized of our society is free, then we will all truly be free. We call on our faith to affirm the truth that only when Black lives matter will all lives truly matter. As Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. First and foremost, BLUU is a Black-led movement drawing and building upon important work begun in the 1960s and early 70s. Black Lives of the UU and the organizing collective are working with hundreds of self-identified Black UUs around the country to design and proclaim how they envision their faith now and in the future. Starting with the 2016 General Assembly, BLUU focused on educating GA participants on the Black liberation movement within and beyond Unitarian Universalism, directly addressing the assumptions that we are a white faith and confirming that the presence, the voices, and the perspectives of Black UUs is critical to countering the impact of anti-Blackness so that we as a faith may move forward to more wholesomeness. In March 2017, BLUU organized the BLUU Convening, a 3-day event which brought together more than 100 Black UUs to help shape BLUU's long-term goals and to develop new programming for the 2017 General Assembly. At GA 2017 in New Orleans, Executive Director Lena K. Gardner spoke of the organization's remarkable achievements in such a short time. In addition, we heard from some of the elder Black leaders within and outside of Unitarian Universalism about the importance of this ministry and how it is building on generations of work. In particular, the pain of Unitarian Universalist history in silencing and rejecting Black leadership was movingly expressed at General Assembly by Dr. Umtangulizi Sanyika, the former president of the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus of the 1960s. For many UUs attending GA in New Orleans, the collective experience contributed to a feeling of hope for a new way in our faith. BLUU also worked with UU leaders to advocate for a restorative justice process after 2 UUA staff members were attacked in New Orleans during General Assembly. Out of the March 2017 convening, the organizing collective developed a new way for Black UUs to organize within our faith, known as #BLUUMicro30. Action teams identified manageable 30-day mini actions to connect justice movement spaces with UU resources and people. Black UUs who participated in the #BLUUMicro30 program are actively working together on actions that complement their individual capacity, congregational connections, and movement knowledge, all with the support of a member of the organizing collective. This has fostered intentional, deeper connections among Black UUs and generated deliberate and concerted organizing efforts to create authentic linking, not only of Unitarian Universalist resources with Black liberation movement spaces, but also of Unitarian Universalism as a faith with why we endeavor to be who we say we want to be in this world. BLUU has also created the Black Lives at UU Ministerial Network, a collective of Black UU ministers, religious professionals, and lay leaders providing worship opportunities and pastoral care to Black UUs. During the convening, it became clear that many Black UUs experience a sense of isolation in our in our congregations. This network provides an additional opportunity for Black UUs to connect with other Black UUs across the country for a spiritual uplift that may not otherwise be available in their home congregation. BLUU harnesses love's power to combat oppression and foster healing as a spiritual and political imperative. We know the power of love to be life-changing, inclusive, relational, uncomfortable, unconditional, and without end.
What's the world coming to? We're losing hope, but I got good news. The world is marching with a brand new sound. If you can't hear it, I'll count it down. We're shouting 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want blacks dying no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Black people always have been great. 9, 10, 11, 12. We have too many blacks in jail. What's the crime? What's the chatter? Pump your fist, everybody say Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Everybody say
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't Some shoot. say black, some say colored. African Americans, stop killing each other. Under pressure, all together, we'll always thrive. You ought to help us to keep all blacks alive. So we can shout 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want blacks dying no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Black people always have been great. 9, 10, 11, 12. We have too many blacks in jail. What's the crime? What's the chatter? Pump your fist, everybody say Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Everybody say
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot. Check the history of the human race. Behind great things is another dark face. We built this country while under attack. Knock us down, we'll bounce right back. It might seem hard, but it's not too late to tell a brother, tell a sister that they're great. You work too much to be torn down. If you got power, please make a sound. Help me shout 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want blacks dying no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Black people always have been great. 9, 10, 11, 12. We have too many blacks in jail. What's the cry? What's the chatter? Pump your fist, everybody say Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Everybody say
I can't breathe.
hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
I can't breathe.
Hands up, don't shoot.
Wow. Wow.
We Imagine a Path by D. Scott Cooper. We bow our heads in order to imagine not one path, but many. We imagine a path forward for those who cannot imagine any path forward because of poor health, financial hardship, family crises, and other roadblocks we cannot begin to understand or imagine. We struggle to imagine a path forward for those who are forced to leave a homeland against their will, and for those unable to leave a war-torn homeland despite their lives being in danger. We imagine a path forward for those who leave their homes to make a better life for their families elsewhere. May we be a welcoming presence along that path toward hope. We come together to imagine a path forward for those of us despairing because we do not seem to know our country nor our neighbors, despite the fact that we have not moved at all. May we be the good we are hoping to find as we travel side by side down the path toward hope. We imagine a path forward for those who feel lonely. May we take one another's hands as we walk that path toward community. Truly, we know as we imagine these ways forward and take one another's hands, The paths will lead to hope. The roads will lead to beloved community. And the arc will bend toward justice because we have dared to travel with love in our hearts.
Let us extinguish our chalice with these words that we read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, or the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts to share with all the world. Our closing words are quotes by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The time is always right to do the right thing. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. People should not be judged on the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Let no man pull you low enough to hate him. Now to our postlude video.
We shall overcome. We shall
Our discussion questions for today are, do you think the lack of knowledge in Black UU history supports the narrative that Unitarian Universality does not appeal to Afro-Americans? If so, how do you think we could fix it? Are you surprised by anything that you heard today? Number 2. And number 3, do you think what role do you think that Unitarian Universalists should play in people of color's lives? Do you think we are reflecting our principles when it comes to Black and brown lives?